Hi, I'm Debbie from the Cyber Scheme, back with you again to talk about professional titles. And today I am with Tamar Everson from Arcanum Cyber Security. Hi, Tamar, welcome aboard. I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about the process that you went through. You are now you have the chartered title, you've been through the process, you had the interview, you did the application form with us, and actually you were one of the first people to go through the process with us and just talk to the people that are having a few doubts about whether they want to go down the interview route, the attestation route, maybe unblock any doubts or worries that they have about what that process looks like from someone that's actually been through it themselves, because I can talk till I'm blue in the face about, oh, don't worry, it's a really supportive process, but it's actually really important that we show people that have done it themselves and come out the other end and survive the process and just get a bit of an angle from them. So thank you for joining me today. I guess the first question would be, you came to us, you decided to come to the Cyber Scheme for your process. How did you find the process from beginning to end? Was the application, what are your thoughts about what that looked like? Was it more detailed than you were expecting? Was it easier? What were your initial thoughts as you went through it?
So the application form itself, it's quite detailed, obviously, because it's wanting to assess you, like your skills and competencies. But the questions were fairly clear in what they were looking for each competency, and I was happy kind of working out what I needed to write for each question. I actually had some advice from one of our directors who said to go through the application form and kind of highlight the keywords in each question to make sure that I was addressing the kind of key points that were asked in the question when I was writing my feedback. So once I made sure I did that and kept rereading and redrafting my application form, by the end I was quite happy with what I'd written. What I also did as well is for a lot of my answers, I gave two examples of where I'd met the competency. Either if I didn't feel one example showed it quite strongly enough, or if I felt a second example could show a completely different perspective on how I met that competency. And I think that really helped.
Did you find that you were writing a lot of information, or that you could get the information down into a few paragraphs? In general, what was the sort of length of answer that you were giving?
I think that probably nearly all of my answers was over the 250 recommended words. I kind of expected the Cyber Scheme to come back and say, this is far too long, please shorten it for us because we don't have all day to read it. But no, they were more than happy to read the information that I had put down. And yeah, I kind of feel like more information is better because it helps strengthen your evidence, because the assessors only see what's written in front of you. And if you go to interview, what you further demonstrate, then they can't use other information, even if they know you kind of outside of the application form, they still can't really use that knowledge other than maybe to give you a prompt to say, go back and pad it out a bit more because we know you know more.
Yeah. And did you have any issues with having to provide redacted information? How did you get around that when you're talking about your scenarios?
So I did have a couple of examples which I wasn't able to disclose full information about. Um, in those examples, I tried to give a very high level overview of the sorts of things I did, why I did them, and where things were redacted, say, kind of this redacted for a particular reason. And yeah, it's a balancing act with kind of confidential information. And obviously, you shouldn't put anything that is especially classified, but even client sensitive information as well in the application. But the assessors do know that you're not allowed to share everything, but you can still demonstrate those competencies by showing your experience in those areas, even if you have to adapt to certain elements. So, yeah, it was a little bit of balancing, but overall, it wasn't too difficult.
And how long would you say it took you? Did you do all the application all in one go? Did you keep coming back to it? How long would you say the process took you to get it to the point where you could submit it to us?
So I did start my application as soon as the Cyber Scheme announced that they were taking applications in. In fact, I had actually considered applying for CSEC membership months and months and months before. So I actually had an early draft and application for them, which I pulled some of my evidence from. So yeah, I won't lie, it was a very long process that I took to complete the form. But part of that was just because I kept rereading it, redrafting it, and trying to make sure it was as perfect as possible. I could have done it a lot quicker if I kind of really wanted to.
And one thing we've seen at the cyber scheme, it's very evident when you get submissions that are your initial thoughts, and you've just put it down on paper, and you've submitted it, and that those are the ones that we do have to come back and say you're going to need to give us a bit more detail. So it sounds as if your experience of writing, rewriting, going back over it again and again, and just fine tuning it is worth it to save that process, that painful process of being told that you've got to do it again.
Yeah, the approach I'd take myself is I'd go through each competency and write kind of one or two bullet points for examples that you can pad out later on. I'd then go back through and try and pad each example out in the style format as advised by the cyber scheme. And again, come back and read it again, check that you've met kind of keywords that are listed in the competency in your example, redraft it if needed. And then once you've completed it all, give the whole application one final read through and check you're still happy as well.
Did you get anybody else to look over it for you, or were you relying on your own sort of gut instinct?
Yes, so I did ask one of our directors to read through my application before submitting. The main feedback he had for me was just a couple of places where I hadn't actually called out the keywords in the competency to just tweak my wording to kind of call out those keywords. So I had the information there, just subtle wording changes to make it even clearer that I had met what was needed.
The use of keywords is really key, actually, and it did definitely come across in your application. You know, it was evident very quickly that you were answering the questions in a relevant way, appropriate to the competency that we were looking for. So I think that's a really essential sort of piece of advice to give, is just think of it in terms of keywords. What are the key aspects of what you're trying to get across, and make sure that that's really clear in all of the competencies. So you submitted the form. You were given an option for attending for interview, which you went for. Can you talk to me a little bit about how the interview went? Were you nervous beforehand? Did you prepare for it beforehand, or did you just sort of wing it? What was your thought process going into that interview?
So I was quite happy that I'd kind of, in my written application, put as much effort into that as I possibly could. So I kind of felt that I was as prepared for the interview as I possibly could be on that front. I was asked to put together a case study ahead of the interview as well, which I hadn't actually been aware was part of the process until I was asked about that. But it's just kind of a one-page example, kind of highlighting as many competencies as possible. The interview itself was a fairly relaxed atmosphere, so the assessor kind of talked me through what the process is, what he'd be asked me about, and that sort of thing. And yeah, it almost felt like an informal chat. Obviously, he was asking me targeted questions to try and extract required information. But it didn't feel like I was being grilled or under kind of undue pressure at any point.
Yeah, I think in a way we use the word interview, and I think that does sort of strike fear into people sometimes about that idea that you're under some sort of pressure, you're under a microscope, and actually what it is just an opportunity to talk about what you've already explained in the application form. So this isn't necessarily new information, but it gives you an opportunity to think and explain why you made the decisions that you did under the circumstances that you made them in. And so I think for some people who may be a bit worried about the word interview, actually a chat about it and the ability to explain verbally is something that people find easier to do sometimes than writing it all down.
Yeah, that's certainly kind of how I felt. I felt like I could portray the information quite well in writing, but I always find when dealing with clients, customers, fellow consultants, it's often easier to just pick up a phone or go face to face and have a meeting with them. It allows you to get a lot more detailed understanding. And I think the interview was kind of exactly the same. It just allowed the assessor to get a more rounded feeling for how I am as a consultant and kind of where my competencies lie, which you can't get across on paper in quite the same way.
And putting your other hat on, you've now become an assessor for us for professional titles. Do you find that the other way as well? When you're in your assessment mode, talking to people and getting that information out of them, do you find that that is the simplest way of getting the required level of understanding of where they're coming from?
So I think the written application gives a great baseline understanding to me as an assessor. But if there's areas which are borderline, I'm kind of like, you almost sound like you have what you need here, but I just can't quite confirm it. That's where the interview really comes in. I can ask questions to demonstrate that, yes, my belief that they probably did have those skills, they just didn't quite show them in the written stage. I can kind of confirm, yes, you do, and get you across the line.
Fantastic. And conversely, I suppose it does expose those people who may be creating written assessments and thinking, oh, I'm going to get away with this because I can put whatever I want on this. There is always the case with edge cases that we will interview if there is any doubt there that the answers are not quite giving us what we're looking for. So it's not a case of attestation being easier or harder. We're going to get that information out of you whichever way we go. It's just the case that if you choose the interview route, you can pre-arm yourself, make sure that the information that you're giving us in written form is the stuff that you then talk about at the interview itself. So without sort of putting you on the spot or making you think of anything too quickly, is there any advice that you would give to someone who is maybe wondering about how to process their next steps? So maybe they've downloaded the form, they've had a go at answering it, and they're just a bit stuck about where to go now. Is there any advice you could give someone in that situation?
Yeah, so I think the single hardest challenge, as evidenced by some of my colleagues who I'm asking to apply at the moment, is starting to put the data down on the form. At the
Yeah.
beginning, it's a big empty screen, and yeah, you just don't know where to start. So what I would do is um, copy the questions into a Word document, so you've got an offline copy to work on. Go through, add one or two bullet points as a possible example that you might use for each competency. And once you've got the bullet points, go through, start with the easier ones, the ones that you are more confident in. Start expanding out into the star format. You might decide it's terrible and rewrite it 5 times. That's absolutely fine. But just get something down, because it's much easier to expand a little bit of text on a page than it is to write a paragraph with no information down already.
Yeah, that's great advice. Thank you. And one more thing before you go. What do you see the future being for people who have professional title? Obviously, there is a bit of a nudge coming from CTLs that they've been told that they have to achieve this in order to stay as Czech team leaders. But the wider picture is that we are trying to professionalize the industry, and this is the way that we're going with that. What are your thoughts about that? Do you see this as being a positive move for the industry? Just tell me what you think about the professionalization agenda.
So I think it's been an industry which for a long time has had no real steer or guidance. There's obviously various organisations like the Cyber Scheme, like Crest, so on, who have always worked for years to kind of have some level of at least professional recognition in terms of exams and things.
Mm.
But I think having a broader recognition across the industry can only be a good thing. Like you said, the Czech scheme has jumped straight on board with it, and imminently you will have to hold professional titles to work as a Czech team leader, and presumably fairly shortly thereafter, Czech team members as well. We have seen at least one tender come in through the wider business looking for professional titles already.
Oh, wow.
I believe that was in one of the other specialisms that launched earlier.
Mhm.
But again, that's a sign that at least kind of government supply chain is taking the professional title seriously, and the rest of industry normally follows by example over time. So I think in a few years' time, it will be very common in contracts and tenders to require some level of professional title.
Yeah, and of course the fact that it measures competency across a wide range of skills on top of that technical stuff that you are measured with a check exam, it does give that extra ability to look at the individual as a whole rather than just whether they are able to pass a check exam. So from our perspective, it's an encouraging sign that we're looking at the other skills, the reporting skills, as being as important as the technical prowess. And so we think that's a good thing generally for industry.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point you raised there. The exams that kind of everyone is familiar with, they're very good at testing your technical knowledge, but they do very little by way of assessing your consultancy skills. And certainly for me, working in a consultancy, it's almost more important that I'm a good consultant than it is that I'm a good technical tester. Because if I find a really interesting issue, I need to be able to tell the client why it impacts their business. And if I can't do that, then yeah, it's just better to be able to be well-rounded, I suppose.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Thank you ever so much for your insights today. Really appreciate that. And I'm looking forward to sharing more insights with you as we go through the next phases, the CPD, the renewals, and the ongoing discussion around, as you say, in bringing this down into check team members as well, which will be the next stage. But thank you very much for your time today. And I'll say goodbye there. Thank you.
Thank you.